This session will be exploring European perspectives on how to engage civil society in achieving environmental, social, and of course, climate justice and targets. Lasting and impactful change is not going to go about and happen unless we drive it from bottom up and involve all stakeholders in society. So the question is, how can the EU and its member states enable collaboration and also dialogue and help negotiate solutions towards rapidly cutting emissions? So coming up is a conversation about engaging civil society to really get this climate transition on the road. And also we're going to talk about the role of governments, of course. So it's my pleasure to welcome here, with me in the studio here in Baku, Ludovic Voet is Confederacy Secretary for ETUC, and Isabella Lövin, member of the European Parliament and representing the Green Party in Sweden, and you're former Prime Minister in Sweden, and you were also former Climate Environmental Minister. Terrific to have both of you here. And we will be joined right now by a third person, and I can introduce him. He's on his way in, and that is Mikael Karlsson. He's climate researcher, Uppsala University, and representing the organization Fairtrans. So take a seat, Mikael, and join us, please. And in the Stockholm studio, we have Marika Palmér Rivera, research officer for LO, which is the Swedish trade union Confederation. Terrific to have you with us in Stockholm. And also next to her is Rosalind Marbina. Rosalind is head of policy at Oxfam Sverige, Oxfam Sweden. So great to have you also, Rosalind. And I'd like to start up. Hello, Mikael. I'd like to start. Sometimes the delegates come running from other sessions and other important dialogues that they're taking part of. So I'd like to start with an overarching question to all of you, and I'd like for you to go about 2 minutes maximum, reflecting on this question. And it's about what are the really tough issues where we really absolutely have to have a broad social involvement. So please share a short intro. I'd like to start with you, Ludovic.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And I think the biggest challenge for climate action is that we need definitely to have ambitious climate action, but it's the recognition of the social and labor challenges of it. It's I would say, rapidly, it's the matching of the social and the labor consequence. If we need to decarbonize our consumption, let's think individually, it means that we would need, each of us, maybe an electric car, electric vehicle, heat pumps, solar panels, and renovation of our homes. This, if I had the sum of it, at least in Belgium, where I come from, it's at least 70,000 euro. This shows concretely how it's impossible for the huge majority of the population without support. So the social challenge is that we cannot, most of us cannot pay for the transformation. The labor challenge of it is that in Europe we are not producing anymore most of these products. So the matching of the social and the labor challenge is making affordable for people the transition, and the labor challenge is that we also need the quality jobs in Europe that produce these products. So this matching is what we think is for the moment missing at European level.
Thank you very much, Ludovic. I'm turning now to Mikael Karlsson from the academic perspective. What can you share?
Well, I agree on the challenges from a social point of view in terms of need for financing and fair climate policies in which policies are put in packages where revenues are recirculated to those experiencing the greatest challenges in terms of few opportunities to transform or low incomes. But at the same time, we need to reflect on the fact that efficiency is not good enough. We need sufficiency as well. So we can't just think about a future where all will have an electric vehicle each, etc., etc. We need to go down from high carbon intensive consumption from meat to more green vegetable food, etc., etc. And what we can show in research is that the acceptability among citizens for stricter climate policies is comparatively high compared to carbon pricing, but still fairness is a decisive factor, both from a general fairness point of view, but also in order to be able to develop stricter policies that are politically feasible.
Thank you, Mikael Karlsson. Isabella Lövin, what is your take on this?
Of course, I agree that we need to have a just transition and that we need support for all the new technologies that we need. But I think the most important thing that we need now is political leadership, and we also need a positive narrative on why we are doing this transition. It's not because we're going to make the life hard for people, but on the contrary, we have to make a more safe environment and safer societies and better societies with a lot of co-benefits when we do the climate transition. And this takes political leadership. And I think about how we managed to transform the entire world during the pandemic. In Sweden, we had press conferences every day with ministers, the prime minister, explaining why we needed to take certain measures, and we had a lot of money all of a sudden to support businesses and people to stay at home or even close their businesses because it was necessary to do. And there was a huge social acceptance on that, because we also explained, if we don't do this, it would be a catastrophe. And we managed through this crisis. And the climate crisis is equally and even more serious than the COVID pandemic. So we need consistent leadership. And I think the EU plays an enormously important role here. And sometimes when you hear like, well, people don't want these climate policies and that's why they're voting for far-right politicians and very populist politicians, but yes, because they are not kind of really looking science into the eyes and taking responsibility and lying to people. And we can't have that now. It's too serious. And people have the possibility to really want to contribute when times are hard as well. And also what Mikael was saying, that if you look at surveys, people normally say that they are willing to pay for the climate crisis and they want serious climate policies.
That's quite overwhelming statistics, around 70% in the most of the surveys correctly. So turning now to Stockholm, Marika, please share your opening statement here.
Yeah, but thank you. I agree with Ludovic that we have to balance the labor challenges and the social challenges, and also what Isabella and Mikael said about the acceptance of the climate transition. What we see in the Swedish Trade Union Confederation is that people, our members, are engaged in the climate transition and accept and feel responsibility for the climate transition, but they don't feel secure that there's a place for them or that they will be able to cope with the cost of the transition. So what we really need is to find ways to distribute the costs and benefits fairly and create trust for people in that this transition will work for them, and that this is a common challenge that we address on the level of society, and not that people put stress on the individual level, that people have to cope individually. So that was, I feel, that how we in the workplaces and in society at large, to engage people in the transition and make sure that they can feel trust that this transition will work for them.
Thank you, Marika. I'm curious now to hear Rosalin's perspective as head of policy at Oxfam Sweden.
Yes, when it comes to short term, or before I begin that, I fully agree with everything you said. Short term climate financing would be one thing. So, for instance, low-income countries, it will be more predictable in how we can compensate them in the global north. So that is one aspect. In a more long term, we need to have an agreement, disregarding which political color you have and which government, that the way we live in the system we have is not sustainable. It doesn't work. And what we in Oxfam is doing is that we we advocate well-being economy. So it's a new economical system that we are trying to manifest and trying to fill with content. Just an example from one research is that with only 30% of all the resources in the world, we could make sure that the whole world population will have sufficient everything they need. So that shows as an example that we have resources if we live sufficiently, but we don't. So that is one aspect. And lastly is, of course, to base everything on our policies on research, and to explain how reality looks like and who are the ones most responsible for the emissions. And in our analysis is the richest. So we have to create policies based on that.
Thank you, Rosalind. And I have a question to all three of you, Marika and Rosalind, and also Ludovic. In terms of your organization, what do you focus on primarily in this transition, and who do you collaborate with?
Well, in the transition as trade unions, we think it's of paramount importance to include workers in the discussion, and that's we often say nothing about us without us, because we are speaking about workers' jobs, we are speaking about workers' living conditions, and also about the future of the communities that they live in. So it's important that the decisions that are taken are not only taken by the employers, who would translate the climate objectives in decarbonation, but maybe without the workers and with massive restructuring that can happen. And that's what we see also in the last this year. We see a lot of restructuring that are promised in the automotive industry, in the supply chain, and in a lot of sectors. So what we need as trade unions is to be at the table, both at regional level, at national level, at company level, at sectoral level, but also at European level, to design the climate policies to make sure that they are just, and that the workers that work in the company that have to be decarbonized, they propose also the solutions.
And you're here at the COP, so you're feeling that this is really happening, that you are getting access to these negotiations?
Well, yes and no. Just transition is on the table of the COP, but it's a little bit emptied of its content. So that's also why we are here to put the content on just transition. That it's also about workers' rights, about social protection, about ensuring decent life and decent jobs and human rights for everyone.
Thank you. So Marika, would you like to add your organization's perspective and who do you primarily collaborate with?
Yeah, well, as a trade union, as Ludovic said, we feel it's very important that we are included in the transformation of the workplaces and in the regional and national level. So that is our focus. In Sweden, we have a long-standing social model where the employers and the unions work together with agreements to regulate the labor market, and that has served us very well in other changes, big changes, both with security for the workers and flexibility and volatility of the labor market. And we see that is also important, very important in the climate transition, and that we should strengthen that. And what we focus on now is, one part is to strengthen and empower local union representatives so they can feel secure in having these discussions on the local level, because we see that it's very important in the local workplaces. Like, what the climate transition is all about, mostly about what we produce and how we produce it. So it's really at the core of the workplaces. So we have to empower workers to have this discussion simply included in the decisions made at the company level, as Ludovic said. So that's one of our focus areas, and work, and also on regional and national level, that the unions and employers work together. And sometimes, and what we have been successful in the past is also that we have together gone to the government and said that in order to make this transition at the labor market, we need these policies in place. So that's what we do, also to make sure that the politicians know that, or implement the conditions that are needed for the transformation of the labor market and transition.
Thank you, Marika. So Rosalind, Oxfam's focus, and also who do you collaborate with? Who do you need to collaborate more with?
As you maybe know, Oxfam, we are on all levels of society, but so we work with different actors, and in Sweden we work, of course, with civil society. We want to work with labor unions as well, to make sure that we are representing the ones who needs it the most, and of course political parties. Right now, the situation in specifically Sweden, maybe in other countries as well within Europe, it's there is a certain stance against civil society and our proposal. So that is something we also work with, and that goes hand in hand, unfortunately, with shrinking space. But we are doing our best. But to summarize, we're trying to work broadly, and also, of course, with scientists and researchers. Everything is based on that, and we have our own, both in Sweden but also globally within Oxfam.
Thank you. Oxfam, of course, recently launched this big report on the effect of the super rich on climate, on the climate, which was quite mind-boggling, actually. So, Isabella Lövin, from the European Union perspective, do you have any good examples to share of countries that actually are focusing and pushing on this civil society engagement for just transition?
I find it quite difficult to answer that question, actually. But I mean, we have there's a ranking on what countries are kind of faring the best in the climate transition and climate policies. And at the moment, Denmark and Estonia and Netherlands, if you talk about European countries, are more or less at the top. And I think today there was a big news about Denmark, that there's a huge, broad agreement in Denmark on putting a price on CO2 in agriculture and also planting a lot of trees. And I think the key here to kind of the acceptance and the public acceptance is that there's a cross-party agreement. And if politicians can really stand by those agreements, then people will fall in line. I mean, so I think the temptation to make political disagreement around climate policies, that is the huge threat to the climate transition. Because otherwise, you know, people will just follow along if we have a very stable rules for society to follow. And then, of course, pair these with support for those that are affected and need to make the transition.
So you mentioned, you gave COVID as an example, and of course we've been using this example. It's a great example. So that was fairly unanimous in the society of Sweden, at least, how we handle this mega crisis. So in terms of learnings from this, in a more profound way, if we add on the perspective of working together, what could we learn from this, from your perspective? Engaging civil society in this transformation?
Well, I mean, everyone was saying during the pandemic, we must, after the pandemic, build back better. And we also saw it as a chance to do better. But have we done that? Actually, no, I don't think we have. So we allow kind of more short-term perspective problems to come in the way. But we need to tackle all the huge challenges and threats to our society, global society today, simultaneously. And that would include another narrative, maybe on sufficiency, maybe on better living, maybe on taxing the rich and also financing the transition. And I'm deeply worried about what's happening with the climate policies in Sweden. I was talking about that ranking. We fell from the top position, which we held for very many years when we were in government, the Greens, and we had the new climate law and a lot of support for the climate transition. And now it's kind of free fall for Sweden, and the present government is actually subsidizing a cut in fossil fuels prices at the pump, and dismantling every climate policy. And this is creating a lot of tension in society and a lot of insecurity for the private businesses, for the industry, for municipalities, for everyone that's making investments in the climate transition is now backing and not knowing what is really the scene. So this is really, really damaging and destructive. So the best way, I mean, I really hope that we at the European level can really take each other's hands and say, okay, this is a huge a threat to our societies. We see the floodings in Valencia in Spain. We had it in Eastern Europe a few weeks ago or a month ago. This is a threat to our societies, and we can manage to take this on and show the world actually that we can make the climate transition. It's
Indeed.
not something that is a sacrifice for us. It's an opportunity for us to create a better future.
And it shouldn't be a political party question. It should be a question of survival that everybody can address.
Absolutely.
So turning now to you, Mikael, on November 9th, which is fairly recently, you published an article in Nature about the quantifying of fair national shares on the remaining carbon budget. And what could you tell the audience about this, and also how this relates to the just transition here?
Well, there is a principle in the Convention on Climate Change that we have a common but differentiated responsibility based also on the respective capabilities among countries. And we started to think about what could that mean. Well, equal emissions per capita over time would be the most fair thing. So what we did was to look in the rear mirror, the historical emissions, since these issues came on the international agenda. And we also looked at the plans, the NDCs or other targets into the future, and looked at, okay, are countries above or under this cumulative per capita emission based on a carbon budget that is compatible with the 1.5 degree warming target. And we could see then that there's a group of 18 countries only in the world that needs to do that need to do better. Some of these countries have emitted so much previously, so even if they would go to zero immediately, they will still be above their fair share. And then you could say, okay, shouldn't they do anything? Well, what they need to do then, well, we hold them in a way accountable for decreasing emissions, supporting mitigation in other countries, or for carbon dioxide removal. A few of these countries that have overspent in the past can cope with their accountability over time by reducing emissions further into the future. That's a way for us to sort of illustrate to what extent countries should be financially accountable for going outside of the budget. And this, of course, plays into the negotiations here that focus in particular on climate financing, where we need to go up one order of magnitude in climate financing. Instead of 100 billion US dollars, we need to increase that by a factor 10, I would say, at least to start with, in the near future. And this would mean that high-income countries in general would support middle or in particular low-income countries in their work on mitigation, adaptation, or carbon dioxide removal. And I think it's important to consider these things because what is clear from a number of studies is that perceived justice is crucial for getting people on board.
Acceptance, yeah.
At the same time, though, I think, you know, these things that tax the rich, fine. But, you know, just looking at the emissions per person and go on the high emitters, it's not sufficient because the mass of the emissions is actually in the mass of the population. So even though rich people in rich country tend to emit enormous per capita, the total volume of that is still small compared with the entire population. So it's not the rich or the less rich. It's not technology or consumption. It's not changing prices or values. It's not society or the individual. It's everything. We need to work on all these things. And even, you know, people with low income can actually save money by taking a shower in 10 minutes instead of 15 minutes. And tap water in Sweden, if it's warm, I mean, you can put it on in the morning and in the evening when you come back, you don't pay anything extra at all. So there are low-hanging fruits all over in society that we need to pick. And that goes for everybody. But of course, still, many people need support in the transformation within countries, between countries, and that's, you know, where we need to increase climate financing globally and in countries. In countries, for instance, if you increase CO2 taxes, we did a study in Sweden, if that is redistributed to people in rural areas and with low income, even those being antagonistic to that tax, we did this in the Fairtrans research program, this study, even those groups became positive to the tax. It's about collective distribution of justice. It's also about participation, as you mentioned, in all settings. And we know how to do this. We know how to transform. We have the technologies, we have the resources, we know the instruments that work effectively, we know how to design policy packages to be more fair than they are at present. So what's missing, and I agree with Isabella, is political leadership. That's not there today, unfortunately, not in Sweden at least. We see some movement in the EU, and hopefully that will be accelerated rather than the other way around.
Thank you, Mikael. I see that Stockholm wants to come in here with comments. Let's start with you, Marika.
No, I just would like to add that Mikael said that we try to change the narrative also to instead of, like sometimes the discussion is that we should exclude people from the transition because otherwise other people have more responsibility. But we feel that everybody should transition and we should let everybody participate in the transition. We should not exclude anyone from the possibility to be a part of the climate transition. So that means that everybody has to do their share, but that we need to make sure that everybody have the means and the possibilities, the conditions to be part of the transition and to transition from fossil fuels. So I just would like to add that that's a different narrative than sometimes you hear that that you have to exclude someone from the transition because they can't afford it. But we have to make sure that everybody can be able to participate. And for that, we need more fair policies. So
Thank you,
I'd just
Marika.
like to add that.
Thank you. Before turning to Rosalind, I just want to give you a follow-up question on that note, Marika. So how can labor unions leverage their influence here in this and play an even stronger role in this?
Oh, that's. I think one part that we do is that as I said, that we empower all our affiliates, all the trade union, their members, to be included in this transition. To feel that sometimes I think. We have these discussions on a very high abstract level, and we have to make the policies concrete and the questions concrete and talk about what we really need and how we can create good lives and what that means. And on the local level, to leverage discussion, mobilize the engagement on the local level in the workplaces. I think that's where lots of the engagement and the responsibility that people feel that we can mobilize that. So I think that's one important role that and to create more of this, strengthen the bottom-up approach for the transition.
Thank you. And I know that your organization has also offered educational circles to your members in terms of knowing and learning more about climate action, correct? Yes.
Yeah, and we're developing that even further so that we can.
It's a good example to share with other unions in the world. Yes.
Yeah.
So Rosalind, please, what is your intervention here?
Of course, everyone has to contribute in the transition, and the long-term solution, once again, is a new economic system, and that can be named in so many ways, depending on who you are and which organization you represent. But for us, it's well-being economy. In short term, it's, of course, how can we get there? We have to see reality as it is, and that goes like, for instance, within Sweden or within Europe. We have so much wealth in Sweden. And the wealthiest that we can see are the ones responsible for most of the carbon emission, the 1% and the 10%. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% are not. And we have to see those kind of differences in order to create policies that will actually combat that. And of course, the solution is never specific group only. It should be everyone, but we have to begin somewhere and create actual policies that will make sure that our emissions will decrease. And we don't do that on individual level, of course, it's collective level. And this goes also not only for Sweden, course, it goes for globally as well, when all individuals in Sweden almost are living more than, for instance, a low-income country. So we have to see that as a whole perspective, but we have to begin somewhere. To only say one specific group, that is not sufficient, and I fully agree with that, but we have to begin somewhere. And as an example, what we propose in Sweden is a new wealth tax that would result in 158 billion Swedish kroner. That is 7 times more than we have calculated that we should bring 24 billion kroner each year to the loss and damage fund, which is way more, by the way, than the government is proposing right now. But that is 7 times the total amount that a wealth tax could contribute to, just as an example. But there are many more, of course.
Thank you, Rosalind. So, turning to you, Ludovic, and also actually I'd like Isabella and Mikael to answer this question. What forms of civil society engagement do you think are more impactful than others in this transition? Is it climate strikes on the streets, or is it education of the workforce? What kind of intervention do you think is the most powerful from your perspective?
Well, for me, it's clear that the climate marches were an important awareness-raising moment. But if we want to speak about decarbonation, concrete decarbonation, it's about industries. So it's about workers also. It's about companies discussing in social dialogue and making collective deals with workers. And that's there that for the moment it's not really happening. I would like to bring also 2 examples that trade unions in different countries have also tried to bring to show that there's a case for decarbonation, but that there are contradictions also. First, in France, in the automotive sector, one trade union showed that it's possible to make a small EV that would cost 15,000 euro, which shows also that socially that's accessible. What makes it inaccessible for the moment is the profit margins of these companies. They do not make the investments to make the quantitative production in Europe and the accessible production for people. That's one example. Second example, it's Tata Steel in the Netherlands, a steel company that for the decarbonation, the trade union proposed, and it was agreed a few years ago, to go to hydrogen. The problem is that the development of the hydrogen markets for the moment, as there's no sufficient investments, is lagging. And so you have the contradiction that you're making proposals, but the market doesn't respond, either through the profit problem, that it's limiting the transformation, either through the fact that there's still no market for hydrogen. These 2 industrial examples that shows that trade unions can engage, but if there's not an enabling framework that makes that the industrials, the companies have to engage there without big social costs, I speak about number of jobs in this case, then it's not working.
Thank you very much, Ludovic. What is your take here, Isabella Lövin, on the most efficient ways of engaging civil society?
Well, there's... I mean, if we look at history, our societies have changed many times, really fundamentally. We have had women taking the place in society, which was unthinkable before in Sweden, having voters' rights, etc., and social rights, free school for everyone, free, medical care, etc. Not absolutely free, but anyway, things that were unthinkable before. And what has created this was very much trying to engage all of society, also with education, reaching out to everyone and making them feel like part of the solution and being part of this transformation. And this was a long time ago when it comes to Sweden, but it shows that we actually have the capacity to make major changes, but it also it's important to create a sense of unity, and that we're doing this because we want to do it and because it's good for us. And I keep returning to this. In Sweden, when we were in government, we created a number of support systems for both for industry, because we're not going to make this transition individually. It's not each and every one of us who's going to make small changes in our daily lives and the transition is done. No, we need steel industry, cement industry, chemical industry, infrastructure. Everything needs to be in line with the zero pollution and zero emissions targets. So we have still a support for technological leaps. One which is called the industrial leap, but also another type of support which is much broader, that where cities, municipalities, smaller enterprises, even like schools or whatever, could apply for support to doing their project in reducing emissions and creating new systems where you can share these experiences on another platform that we created, Fossil Free Sweden, which has really led to extraordinary results, where like 70% of all Swedish emissions, those industries and activities and branches that contribute to those emissions have roadmaps to reaching zero emissions by 2045, and they made up these roadmaps, not the politicians, but we created the conditions for that.
And also in setting up these roadmaps, the trade unions were involved in many
Absolutely,
aspects.
and very important. So
Very important. So Mikael, civil society engagement, what is your take as a professor on this?
Well, I mean, the society we have today has developed since the Neolithical revolution 15,000 years ago, or the industrial system since 100 years ago. So, of course, it's very, we have a lock-in situation, it's rooted, we have habits, behaviors, etc. It's difficult to change society. But considering that, I would say that civil society organizations, women's movement, environmental organizations, trade unions, etc., have been over time quite successful within their areas. But what we need to do now is for environmental organizations to be engaging themselves in issues relating to work issues, justice issues, which is not their tradition to work on, and we need trade unions to deal with environmental issues and challenges, and that's where they need to come together. And that's a learning process, a challenge linked to that. And I think also for us as scientists, it's also important to become involved. When we talk about co-production or co-creation of knowledge, which some interpret as, scientists top down, educate them. No, it's not that way around. It's a mutual situation with synergies where we also, of course, learn from environmental organizations and trade unions. We have with LO in Sweden, for instance, a great collaboration that gives us confidence to start now on European level to collaborate and help to stimulate, facilitate collaboration between environmental organizations and trade unions on EU level. And this is in a way civil society collaboration that you can compare with what Isabella talked about previously, that we need political agreements across political blocks. And I made a study on the Swedish climate law that, you and other politicians were involved in making that a reality. And that was a success, irrespective of quite tough, normal daily debates on climate issues. In this Swedish collective public inquiry system that we have, when politicians could sit down, discuss, trade unions were there, researchers, environmental organizations, experts, and could work together for 1.5 to 2 years, they came out with a climate policy framework that, when it was presented, was the toughest in the world. Now the Swedish government claims that's still the case, but a lot of other countries have moved ahead, and the Swedish government is dismantling most of this, so emissions go up and Sweden is falling down on the climate league in a way. So, but I think this collaboration between civil society organizations and researchers, and of course also with business organizations and employers, can show that there is a willingness within industry, within civil society, among workers, environmentalists, and so to transform, and that would hopefully generate some political force, but we don't see that. We see right-wing extreme populism fighting that, but I don't think they will last. They have never lasted. They have never been winning. We win over time, so it's just, so roll up your sleeves, collaborate more, and we will succeed again.
Thank you very much. Before concluding this panel, Fairtrans, you mentioned it several times. Could you tell the viewers a bit about how to find information about this research and collaborative it's a huge project.
Yeah. These are ways, fairtrans.nu on the website. It is a collaboration between a number of universities in Sweden, including Uppsala University, Stockholm University, the largest trade union in Sweden, environmental organization, and also organizations working on rural Sweden, indigenous people. And we see that the common denominator is large rather than small. So that gives me a lot of hope that transformation is indeed possible. And we know at the same time, in the Swedish case, as Isabella said also, Fossil-Free Sweden has shown that more than 20 different branches within industry are also ready. And industry is a stands for a great share of the emissions, as does transport. And you know, when these organizations collaborate, they show politicians that moving ahead is not so problematic, it's not so expensive, it's not something that you will lose, but rather gain votes from. And it's great to see, I mean, that trade unions are now increasingly very active on not only climate but environmental issues at large. I mean, that's promising.
It is promising indeed. Thank you very much, Mikael Karlsson, for setting the stage here with the Fairtrans project. And thank you, all of you, for contributing to this panel. What we see here is, of course, the big need for collaboration, and you're expressing it, and the power of the unions here, and also, of course, the role of Oxfam as a global organization to shed light on the injustices here. We collaboration and transparency, and also, of course, the push from bottom up is truly promising to hear your stories about. So thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights. And thank you very much, the team in Stockholm also, for joining, and keep up your very strong work here. And now it's time to move on. Thank you.